All right, greetings all. The purpose of this video is to go over an example of kind of using the problem solving process to solve a problem, but also in a way that we're solving a kind of more complicated version of a problem that All right, so we're told in this problem that at the beginning of 2022, the revenue of the Evil Corporation, Inc. was $150 million. Before I read on, I'm going to go ahead and highlight that because that seems like that might be an important piece of information. Then we're told that in the first quarter, the amount decreased by 5%. Then it increased by 5% in the second quarter, decreased by 7% in the third quarter, and then increased by 9% in the fourth quarter. I'm going to use that information to answer a couple of questions. The first one being, by what percent did the revenue increase or decrease? Okay, so we're trying to figure out a percentage change here. Now, first things first with this. So there are several stages of how the revenue is increasing or decreasing, right? In fact, it increases or decreases 4 times. So at first, at the end of the first quarter, decreases, then it increases by a certain amount, then it decreases by 7%, and then increases by 9%. Okay, so we're going to have to do 4 different calculations here. And we're also told what our starting value is at 150 million. So what I'm going to do to start this problem is I'm going to start by writing that out all the way. So 150 million will be 150 followed by 6 zeros. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the first calculation to figure out what the revenue was after the first quarter. Now note again, it says up here, and I know my work's getting a little sloppy, so let me actually erase some stuff so it's easier to see. I'm going to highlight this. It was decreasing by 5%, or it decreased by 5% in the first quarter. Now to figure out then what the new amount is, what the new revenue is, let's keep in mind that a whole is always 100%. And in this case, that would be our starting value here is 100%. And if it's going to decrease by 5%, so it's going to go down by 5%, then the new amount will be 95% of that amount we started with. So to find our amount after the first quarter, what we could do is just go ahead and find 95% of 150 million. And so to do that, we know that 95% as a decimal, we take the decimal place here, move it 2 spots to the left, that's 0.95. So I'm going to do 150 million times 0.95. Okay, and we can go ahead and plug that into our calculator. And we get that the new revenue, or the revenue at the end of the first quarter was 14,250,000. Okay. And sorry, I have that number wrong. It's not 14,250,000. It is 142,500,000. My apologies. Okay, so now let's look at the amount after the second quarter. Now, when we read the information given in the problem, it says it was increased by 5%, which maybe makes you think that, well, if we decreased by 5%, and then we increased by 5%, we should be back to where we started. However, when we talk about this increasing by 5%, we have to think of that in terms of our new kind of quote starting amount, okay? And it's going to increase that number by 5%. So our new starting amount at the beginning of the second quarter is 142,500,000. And that's the amount that's going to increase by 5%. And so if we again think of that new starting amount as our kind of baseline 100%, right? If it increases by 5%, then we're going to add 5%. And so what we're looking at finding now is 105% of that amount. And to do that, we again convert this into a decimal. So we take the decimal, move it over 2 spots. So we end up with 1.05 as our decimal. And then to find 105% of that amount, we can just take it and multiply it by 1.05. And when we do that, we get that the new revenue at the end of that second quarter is going to be 149,625,000. Okay. And then we can continue on from there, as you might guess. So in the third quarter, we see that it tells us, problem tells us that the revenue had decreased by 7%, which means that that new quote starting value, the 149,625,000, has decreased by 7%. And if we again think of the full amount as being 100%, if it decreases by 7, it goes down to 93%. As a decimal, that is 0.93. And so we'll take this amount here, multiply it by 0.93, and we end up with 139,151,250. Okay, and so that would be the revenue at the end of the third quarter. And then we go ahead and find the amount at the end of the fourth quarter now. Okay, which again, this tells us that it increases by 9%, which means that that new starting amount there, the 139,151,250, that is increasing by 9%. So it's going from 100% to 109, which is a decimal be 1.09. If we multiply those two, and I apologize for the changing color there, we end up with, and I'm going to change back. We end up with 151,674,862.50 as the amount after the fourth quarter. Okay. All right, and that ends up being our final amount, right? And so if we compare that to what we started with, because remember way back here at the beginning of the first quarter, we had 150 million. If we compare that, it looks like overall, our revenue went up, right? So it's higher, the final number is higher than what we started with, okay? And so we can say that the revenue increased, and the next question would be, by what percent did it increase? Okay. Well, this is where we will use a formula that we learned earlier in the unit. So I'm going to go ahead and erase some of this, which is our relative change formula. All right, and we're going to use it using these two numbers, the starting number of 150 million, as well as our ending value there of 151 million. And we'll do that as soon as I've got this all erased here. Okay, and so you may remember that the formula for relative change, I'm just going to write RC for relative change, is the ending value minus the starting value divided by the starting value. And then we multiply by 100 to make it into a percent, because relative change is a percent. Okay, so to do this, we'll go ahead and plug in our ending value. That's our 151 million. 151, 674, 862 and 50 cents minus our starting value. That's 150 million. We'll divide by the starting value, which is 150 million, and then multiply by 100. Okay, so go ahead and plug that in the calculator, doing that off screen here. Wait, give me just 1 second. Okay, and once I calculate that all out, I end up with final value here being 1.117%. Okay, so it looks like the revenue overall increased by 1.117%. Also note that another way to know that it increased here is see that the final answer we got here was positive because I didn't use any absolute values here in the numerator. Sometimes with relative change, we'll use absolute values, but I didn't. So since I ended up with a positive answer there, we know that it increased. Okay. I think there is a second part of this problem. Nope, I skipped the second problem. I did this in the wrong order. I apologize. So we're supposed to first answer whether the company's revenue increased or decreased overall. We saw it increased. And then in the second part, we figured out the percent. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching.